I never thought it would come to this. My daughter, the little girl I held in my arms, the woman I guided through life, she stood before me, her words as cold as ice, and told me to stay out of her life. It didn't hit me all at once. It was as though time slowed down in that moment, and the words hovered in the air, heavy and suffocating. Stay out of her life. Was this really happening? I had always been there for her. Every birthday, every school play, every late-night conversation when she needed advice. I sacrificed so much of myself, giving everything I had to ensure she had the best chance at happiness. And yet, here I was, pushed away by the one person I'd poured my heart into. It started innocently enough. I had made a small request, something so minor, so inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. I asked her if she could visit more often, or at least give me a call now and then. It had been months since I'd seen her face in person, and I couldn't help but feel the sting of that distance. She and her husband were busy with their new life, their growing family, and I understood that. But I missed her. She was my only child, and despite the years and the miles that had come between us, I believed there was an unspoken bond, one that couldn't be severed by time or distance. But when I heard those words, I felt something inside of me crack. It was like I had been holding on to something fragile, and suddenly it shattered. Her eyes were distant, almost cold. There was no warmth, no tenderness in them. It wasn't just the words she said that hurt me. It was the way she said them. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even upset. She just didn't care. She had made up her mind. She didn't need me anymore. "I'm done, Mum," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I don't want you involved in our lives anymore. Stay out of it. I've got my own family now." The words stung more than I ever imagined they would. But what hurt even more was the finality in her voice. She wasn't just asking for space. She was shutting me out entirely. There was no room left for me in her life. My daughter had just closed the door, and I was standing outside, alone. I wanted to say something, to plead with her, but the words wouldn't come. I had never been one for confrontation, never liked raising my voice. So, I stood there, silent, and let the pain of her words wash over me. I couldn't believe it was happening, but I knew, deep down, that this moment had been coming for a long time. The distance had been growing, slowly, over the years. I just hadn't wanted to see it. My heart broke in a way I didn't think was possible. It wasn't just the loss of a daughter. It was the loss of my place in the world. For so long, I had been a mother first, my entire identity tied to that role. And now, with one callous sentence, that identity was gone. But in that moment, as I stood there, fighting the tears that threatened to fall, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, but it was joined by a quiet, uncomfortable realization. Maybe it was time for me to take control. If my daughter didn't want me in her life anymore, then maybe it was time for me to stop pretending I didn't have my own life to live. And that's when I made the decision that would change everything. I would take my inheritance, the one thing I had always planned to pass down to her, and keep it for myself. It was time to reclaim what was mine, to stop giving when no one seemed to care. The more I thought about it, the more the idea felt right. She had closed the door on me. Now, I would walk away and take back what I had given her without a second thought. The days that followed were a blur. I could barely look at myself in the mirror without feeling a sense of loss that I didn't know how to deal with. My daughter had always been my pride, my greatest accomplishment. But now she had cast me aside like an old coat she no longer needed. The silence between us grew, louder than any argument could ever be. I didn't call her. She didn't call me. There were no more visits, no more family dinners, no more catching up over coffee. It was as if we had both vanished from each other's lives. The absence of her voice, her laugh, her presence in my home was a sharp, aching emptiness I couldn't escape. I tried to distract myself. I visited friends, went out for walks, attended a few community events. But no matter what I did, my thoughts always returned to her. The quiet stillness of the house was too loud. Every part of it screamed of the life I had once had, the love I had once shared with my daughter. Now, I was alone with nothing but the echoes of the past. And in the silence, something changed in me. I thought about how much I had sacrificed over the years. There was a time when I was the center of her world. I had been the one she turned to for comfort, for advice, for love. But somewhere along the way, I had become invisible. I had spent so much of my life giving to her, to my family. I had worked hard, put aside my own desires, made countless sacrifices to make sure she had everything she needed. And what had it gotten me? Rejection. A sharp dismissal of my worth. It hurt more than I could explain, but as the days passed, I began to ask myself, why had I never considered that maybe I deserved more? More than the scraps of attention she had thrown my way, more than the feeling that I was always second to everyone else. My inheritance had always been something I intended to give her. I had set it aside for her, thinking it would be a way to help her start her own life. But now, the thought of giving it to someone who had so easily cast me aside felt like a betrayal to myself. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I had spent so much of my life pouring into her, and now it was time for me to do something for myself. I made a decision. I would take back what I had given her, the house, the savings, the little things I had planned for her future. Everything. I would not leave it to her. Not anymore. I don't know why it felt right, but it did. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of empowerment. She had cut me out of her life, and now I was going to cut her out of mine. That evening, after dinner, I sat down at my desk. I picked up the phone and began the paperwork. The lawyer who had helped me with the will was only a call away. I knew what I needed to do, and I was ready. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vengeful. Not exactly. But I was tired. Tired of always being the one to give, to sacrifice, to be second in line. Now, I was taking back control. For once, I was doing something for myself. As I signed the papers and transferred the inheritance into my name, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. It wasn't about the money or the assets, or even the property. It was about taking back my own life. The next few days passed in a quiet blur. I spent most of my time at home, pacing around, wondering if I had done the right thing. I knew, deep down, that I had. But the fear lingered. Was I being selfish? Was I justified in taking what was mine? Or was this an act of spite? I didn't have an answer. But what I did know was this. I couldn't continue living in the shadows of someone else's expectations. I had always been the one to give. I had always been the one to show up, to be the support, to lend a hand. Even when it hurt, I gave. Because that's what mothers do, right? But when the love, the care, the sacrifices went unacknowledged, when they were met with disdain, it began to feel like I was being erased from the very life I had built. I was no longer just her mother. I was a convenience, something to be dismissed when not needed. My daughter had always been my pride. She was the child I had nurtured, the person I had put everything aside for. The decision to take back my inheritance wasn't about the money. It was about reclaiming what had always been mine, a part of me that I had let slip away for far too long. I sat at the kitchen table one morning, sipping my coffee, and thought about what came next. I wasn't angry at her, not really. She was simply a product of the world we had both created. But I was tired of being the afterthought. I was tired of waiting for the scraps of love, the fleeting moments of attention, the quiet apologies that never seemed to come. So, I took action. I picked up the phone again, this time to the bank. The house was mine, but the paperwork needed to be updated. The names on the account had to be changed. The legal documents needed to be filed. It was tedious, but I was committed. I wasn't doing this out of spite, but out of a need to take back control of my life. It felt almost foreign to me. For so long, I had been defined by what I could do for others. Now, I was making decisions for me. Decisions that were hard, but necessary. I had spent too many years making everyone else feel comfortable, putting their needs above my own. It was time for me to be comfortable. It was time for me to put myself first. I wasn't sure how my daughter would react when she found out. I imagined her anger, her shock, maybe even her betrayal. But that wasn't my concern anymore. My concern was me, my well-being, my happiness. I had sacrificed enough, and I had reached my breaking point. As the legal steps were completed, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't the inheritance that mattered. It was the act of taking back something that was mine, something I had every right to. I was no longer the invisible mother, the one who was always on the receiving end of empty promises. I was someone who could make decisions for herself, who could stand up for herself. And in that moment, I felt stronger than I had in years. It didn't take long for the storm to arrive. I had just returned home from running a few errands when I saw her name on the caller ID. My heart skipped, and for a moment I considered ignoring it. But something inside me urged me to pick up the phone. I had already made my decision. I was no longer going to shy away from confrontation, especially not when it came to my own well-being. "Mom," her voice crackled through the speaker, and I could hear the anger in it even before she spoke. "We need to talk." I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. "What's going on, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral, though inside I was trembling. I knew exactly why she was calling. "You know exactly what's going on," she snapped. "You've taken everything. The house, the money, everything that was supposed to be mine. Why would you do that?" Her words came at me like a slap, and I could feel the heat rising in my chest. I had expected anger, but hearing it from her, the same daughter I had sacrificed everything for, felt like a betrayal that was too deep to grasp. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange calm wash over me. "I did it for me," I said, my voice steady. "I gave everything I had for your future. But when you told me to stay out of your life, I realized something. I've been putting everyone else first, and I've neglected myself. That's not happening anymore. This inheritance, it was always mine to begin with, but I gave it to you. Now I'm taking it back." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought she might hang up. But then she spoke, her voice trembling with fury. "Are you serious right now? You've always been so self-righteous, Mom. Always telling me what's best for me, always making decisions for me. But now you're doing this? You've always been overbearing, controlling, and now you're taking everything I'm supposed to inherit. You've destroyed everything. And for what? To prove some point about your own worth?" Her words cut deep, sharper than I could have imagined. I wanted to argue, to shout back, and tell her everything that had been building inside me for years. But instead, I stayed quiet. The silence hung between us, thick and suffocating. I didn't destroy anything, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. You destroyed this relationship, not me. You decided I wasn't worth your time, so now I'm deciding that I'm worth more than the scraps you've been throwing me. There was another pause, and I could hear her breathing heavily, her frustration mounting. Then she said something I wasn't prepared for. You're a selfish woman, Mom. I can't believe you'd do this. I don't even know who you are anymore. You've ruined everything. I could hear the hurt in her voice, the sharp edge of disappointment. But beneath that, I recognized the underlying truth. She was angry, not because I had taken the inheritance, but because I had finally stopped being the person who existed solely for her benefit. I had taken a stand, and that wasn't something she was ready for. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said quietly, my heart aching. But I'm done apologizing for trying to be a mother. I've been invisible to you for too long, and I'm not going to stay invisible anymore. And with that, the conversation ended. She hung up before I could say another word. The weight of her anger, her resentment, lingered in the air long after the call ended. My hands shook, but I didn't cry. This was a choice I had made, a choice I had to live with. As the hours passed, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the right decision. I had taken back control, but at what cost? Would this be the last conversation I ever had with her? Was this really the end of our relationship? But deep down, I knew that no matter how painful it was, I had done something that was long overdue. I had finally taken back my life. And if that meant losing her, so be it. The days that followed felt like I was walking through a fog. My phone remained eerily silent. No calls from my daughter, no messages, nothing. I could almost feel the distance growing between us, stretching further and further with every passing hour. But despite the emptiness, there was something strangely liberating about it. For the first time in years, I was no longer waiting for someone else to make me feel valued. I wasn't depending on her approval. I was living for myself, and I had never been more certain of my decision. The fallout didn't just come from her. Family members, people I hadn't even heard from in years, started reaching out, questioning me, criticizing my choices. It seemed like everyone had an opinion on what I had done, on what I was taking, and why. My sister called me first, her voice tight with disbelief. "You can't be serious," she said, her tone filled with judgment. "You really think taking the inheritance from your own daughter is the right thing to do? Have you completely lost your mind? You've raised her, for heaven's sake. This is her legacy too." But that's where the misunderstanding lay. They thought this was about money, about greed. They didn't understand that it was never about the inheritance at all. It was about the years I had given, the sacrifices I had made. It was about me reclaiming something that had been mine from the start. It was about my dignity, my sense of self. But they didn't see it that way. "You don't know what it's like, Kathy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "To be cast aside by your own daughter, to give everything you have and watch them walk away without a second thought. I've given everything for her. And now, it's time I gave something to myself, something that's mine." My sister didn't respond. She just sighed, her voice softer now. "I just don't want to see you make a mistake. You can't undo this, you know." And she was right. I couldn't undo it. Once the inheritance was transferred, there was no going back. I had made my decision, and now I had to live with it. The next day, it was my brother who called. His voice was a mix of concern and frustration, but I could tell that even he was struggling to understand. "Mum, you've got to fix this. You're driving your daughter away. She's hurt, and you're only making it worse." "Maybe I am," I said, my tone a little colder than I intended. But she hurt me first, and for too long, I let her. The conversation ended quickly, leaving me with a sense of isolation that I hadn't expected. The entire family seemed to turn against me. Their loyalty lay with her, and I couldn't blame them. She was their daughter, their niece, their granddaughter. But no one seemed to care that I was still a mother, that I had feelings too, that I had given so much, only to be ignored and discarded when I was no longer useful to them. It was painful, yes. But something deep inside me stirred. I had always been the one to bend, to sacrifice, to apologize, even when I was in the right. But now I was standing firm, even if it meant losing everyone. And it was a strange kind of strength that I hadn't realized I had. In the weeks that followed, I didn't see my daughter. Not once. There were no visits, no calls, no attempts at reconciliation. I didn't reach out either. I wasn't going to beg her to see me, not after everything I had given. I kept busy. I traveled. I visited old friends. I even started a small garden in the backyard, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time for. Little by little, I found myself again. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I wasn't just a woman who lived for others. I was me. And for the first time in years, I realized that was enough. The silence from my daughter continued, but there were moments, fleeting but real, where I felt at peace. I had always defined myself by my relationship with her, by the role I played in her life. Now I was learning to define myself by who I was outside of that. I wasn't just her mother. I was a woman with her own dreams, her own choices, her own path. But there was still a gnawing ache in my chest, a place where her love used to be. I couldn't fully let go, no matter how hard I tried. There was still hope, faint but persistent, that one day she would come around, that she would realize what she had lost and come back to me. But deep down, I knew it was no longer in my hands. The choice had been made, and the consequences were mine to bear. It was late one evening when I found myself sitting in the quiet of the living room, the soft glow of a table lamp casting long shadows across the walls. The house felt empty without her, without my daughter. I had made the decision to step away from the role I had played for so many years, to stop being the mother who existed solely to cater to someone else's needs. But now, in the silence, the weight of that decision settled in. I thought about the life I had built, the sacrifices I had made. I had never asked for much in return. All I had ever wanted was to be seen, to be loved, to be respected. But somewhere along the way, I had lost myself in the process of giving. I had let my entire identity be tied to her, to the family, to the idea that my worth was defined by how much I could give. I never thought about what it would mean for me if that well ran dry. The inheritance was never just about the property or the money. It was a symbol of everything I had given up over the years, my time, my dreams, my needs. It was mine to keep, to decide what to do with. It was the only thing left that belonged solely to me. But as the months passed, I began to feel a kind of guilt that I hadn't expected. Was I too harsh? Was there a way to have reconciled without taking something so significant from her? I found myself questioning if I had handled things the right way. But then I reminded myself, she had made her choice first. She had told me to stay out of her life, to leave her alone, to stop being part of her world. And in that moment, I had realized that I had spent my whole life bending for others. I had allowed my own identity to be defined by people who took, but never gave back. But still, there were days when the pain was unbearable, the holidays especially. I would pass by the family gatherings, the empty chair at the table, and wonder if this was how it was meant to be. Would I ever hold my grandkids again? Would I ever see my daughter smile at me like she used to? Those were the thoughts that kept me awake at night, the ones that lingered in my mind when I was alone. Then there were the good days, the days when I'd go out with friends or sit in my garden, watching the flowers bloom as the seasons changed. I had moments of peace that I hadn't had in years. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone. I didn't need to beg for attention or affection. For the first time in a long time, I was living for me. But the loneliness was still there, lurking in the corners. The absence of my daughter, the emptiness where our bond used to be, haunted me more than I cared to admit. There were times when I felt an overwhelming urge to pick up the phone, to call her and try to fix things, even if it meant swallowing my pride. But something inside me stopped me. I knew that I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't be the person who lived in the shadow of someone else's expectations. I couldn't continue to sacrifice myself for someone who didn't seem to care. It wasn't about being right or wrong anymore. It was about survival, about finally putting myself first. And yet, a small part of me still held on to hope. Hope that one day she would see the hurt I had endured, the love I had given, and come to understand why I had done what I did. But I knew better now. I knew that healing didn't come from waiting around for someone else to change. It came from within. I spent hours reflecting on all the choices I had made, and as painful as it was, I realized something important. I was no longer just a mother. I was a woman with a life to live, with dreams of my own, and I had every right to pursue those dreams. I wasn't just here to serve others. I wasn't just here to be invisible. This was my time now. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. It was almost a year later when I received the call that changed everything. I had long since settled into my new life, more independent, more at peace, though still carrying the scars of what had transpired. I had kept busy. I had travelled to places I'd always dreamed of visiting, joined new groups, and made new friends. My life, once defined by my daughter's needs, was now mine to shape. I had learned to appreciate the small moments of joy, and in many ways, I had rediscovered parts of myself I had long forgotten. But then, one crisp autumn morning, the phone rang. It was her. "Mum." Her voice was soft, hesitant, a far cry from the anger that had once filled our conversations. "Can we talk?" I froze. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I had heard her right. It had been so long since I'd heard her voice without the bitterness, without the walls she had put up between us. I hadn't expected this. I took a breath, trying to steady myself. "I thought you didn't want me in your life," I said, my voice calm but guarded. "I was wrong," she replied, her voice shaky, the weight of what she was about to say hanging between us. "I've been so angry, so blind, and I was selfish. I never understood what you were going through, what you needed. I'm sorry." The words came out slowly, like she was trying to piece together something that had been broken for so long. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. I I don't know what to say," I whispered, my heart heavy with all the emotions I had buried for so long. "It's been so long, sweetheart. So much has happened." "I know," she said, "and I don't expect things to be the same, but I need you to know that I was wrong. I never should have pushed you away. You've always been there for me, and I took that for granted. I'm sorry." I didn't know how to respond at first. There were so many layers to this, so much hurt, so much resentment. But deep down, I knew this was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment I had hoped for, but never truly expected. But then, she said something that made me pause. "I don't want to go through the rest of my life without you, Mom," she continued. But I also know that I can't just pick up where we left off. I've hurt you, and I have to own that. But I want to try. I don't want to lose you. Not again. It was a moment of reckoning for both of us. A fragile first step toward healing, but a step nonetheless. The past wasn't something we could just erase, and I wasn't ready to forget everything that had happened. But I also wasn't willing to close the door on the possibility of rebuilding what we had lost. I don't know what the future holds, I said, my voice thick with emotion. But I think, maybe, we can start with something small, one conversation at a time. I'd like that, she whispered. I really would. And with that, we hung up. The weight that had settled on my chest for so long began to lift. But I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust had been broken. Time had been lost. But in that moment, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. The possibility of something better. It wasn't about the inheritance anymore. It wasn't about who had been right or wrong. It was about understanding, about healing, and about finding a way back to each other, if we could. As I sat there, I realized that I had done the right thing all those months ago. I had stood up for myself. I had taken control of my life, even when it meant walking away from the people I loved most. And now, I was beginning to understand that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most unexpected results.